Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for plucky misfits and problem solvers. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, and today we're going to talk about the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, which began with this post from President Trump on Truth Social. Quote, "Following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Many are not students, they are paid agitators. We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again. If you support terrorism, including the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, your presence is contrary to our national and foreign policy interests, and you are not welcome here. We expect every one of America's colleges and universities to comply. Thank you." End quote. It's a topic which touches on several big societal issues. Can permanent residents be deported for hate speech, for anti-American sentiment? Should they be? Where is the bright line between protected speech versus incitement, trespassing, intimidation? When do we, as a nation, quit scrutinizing prospective American citizens on whether or not we want them to become American? On my end, I am inclined to look at this issue in light of free speech. And my position on free speech is, one of the great things about America is that you get to say and believe unpopular, stupid, or even hateful things. There are no gatekeepers for acceptable opinion here north of the wall amongst the wildlings. Permanent residents do not get to vote or own firearms, I don't think, but they are entitled to some constitutional protections, namely due process and freedom of speech. So I find myself disagreeing with the administration, or at the very least, I would like the government to provide more clarification and specifics of this case to my satisfaction that Khalil is not being deported due to protected speech. My guest today does not share my interpretation of the event or my opinion on it, and is going to offer some significant, informed pushback to my analysis. And I welcome that. I want you, the listener, to have two perspectives on this so that you can make up your own mind. Hopefully, this quasi-argument between friends will provide you with the information you need to orient yourself. Two quick things before we jump in. First, patrons. As always, I welcome your thoughts and feedback. I'm genuinely curious to see what you all come up with on this one, and if there's a lot of chatter, I might do a poll just to see where everybody's head's at. I do want to warn you, though. Anna, my guest today, Anna, has been known to read and respond to Patreon comments. So don't write anything if it'll freak you out if she directly responds to what you say. Next, I cut out about 25 minutes from our chat because after listening to it multiple times, it seemed to me that we entered a feedback loop where we would repeat the same thing that we already said, only more exasperated each time, which is my fault as a host. So I have streamlined the episode accordingly, which I think makes for a better chat. But if you find yourself thinking either A, that was a weird transition, why did they do that? Or B, why didn't he or she elaborate on that point? It might just be my editing. Now, the last thing I ever want to do is misrepresent a guest on this show, so just in case, I have included a link to the full unedited interview in today's episode description, should you wish to peruse that version. Although I think this streamlined version is more enjoyable and straightforward without losing any significant analysis. Enjoy! My guest today is Anna Gorisch. She is an immigration attorney with Kindle Immigration Law, friend of mine and friend of the show, and psyched to talk about today's topic. Hello, Anna.
Hello, Heaton.
Anna, before we jump in, can you make me feel better about any of my life decisions involving not living in a hot climate?
I might be able to. The AC is out at my house, and
Why would that matter, Anna? It's March.
you see, I live in Texas, Austin, in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been getting up into the 90s a couple of times. And so it's 80 degrees in my house right now. And the best part is the guy came to look at it today. Oh, you're going to love this heat. And you would be so excited if this was you. The AC is broken and leaking, which means it probably needs to be replaced. But of course, my landlord is going to insist on trying to fix it first.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I am not at all confident that it's going to be fixed quickly. So I'm hoping for a return to more of those 70-degree days lately, 65. Those days, you're really missing out, man. You can just,
Right.
it's so great.
But
not today.
I'm sorry that you are sweaty and in 80 degrees. You are my friend. I am sorry for you. However, this does make me feel better about my life decisions at this exact moment.
Well, and that's what this podcast is really about.
Already we're off to a great start, which is...
Should we talk about immigration or not?
Let's talk about immigration. So who are we talking about and why?
Well, we're talking about a man named Mahmoud Khalil. And we're talking about him because he has been detained. And some people think that's wrong. And there are arguments that he has been arrested purely for exercising his free speech rights. And then, there are arguments on the other side that distinguish his actions from speech, and also valid points about the difference between being a lawful permanent resident, a conditional permanent resident, and a citizen.
Okay. All right. I think this is good. I think we're going to argue about this.
I love it.
And you know what? We might be evenly matched because I don't have a law degree, but you're having to suffer through an 80-degree room. So we might actually meet in the middle.
Did you break my AC?
I would never, I would not even if I were committing war crimes, I would not turn off somebody's air conditioning unit. No.
You know what?
No,
I
did not.
believe you. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe you.
So how about this? Yeah, we're talking about Mahmoud Khalil. I don't know nearly as much about this. I certainly don't have a degree in. I don't have a practice in immigration law as you do. So you have far more depth than I do in this. But it's my understanding that yes, Mahmoud Khalil has been taken by ICE or whoever it is. They've been sent to. He's been sent to Louisiana. And he is going to be deported. Other relevant details that will probably come up in the conversation. He is not actively a student at Columbia University, although he was a student at Columbia University when the various things that he's being detained, expelled for occurred. He is a green card holder and permanent resident with a wife who is 9 months pregnant. So there
8
are
months, I thought, but
8 months. Okay, 8 months. All right.
I don't know which is more sympathetic.
Their babies grow faster. That's the thing. So I just said 9 months.
Sorry, I wasn't. Okay.
Okay, so from what I've read of this so far, the Department of Homeland Security issued a statement that said Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. And that's kind of the pretext for this, is that he's Trump's had several statements of if you are supporting Hamas or other terrorist organizations or you are anti-Semitic on campus, we don't want you in our country, you will be deported. A subsequent and specific tweet comes up. Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, designated terrorist organization, and he's kicked out. My read on this is I think they probably can do it. I don't think they should do it. So that's where I'm at. In my read of it, they're going to default on the 1952 immigration, whatever act that is, 1952 Immigration Act, which explicitly says you're not allowed to kick people out based on former membership in groups, speech, etc. But there's this carve-out thing in it that says that if the Secretary of State deems you a threat to American national security, they can kick you out. I don't see any way around that. If Marco Rubio says, I, Secretary of State, deem Mahmoud Khalil to be a threat to American security, I don't know how you get around that. The court would have no standing. That's just designated in there, unless they rule that law itself unconstitutional. But I don't think they should do it, because I do think it basically ends up being there's a guy who's a jerk that is effectively getting kicked out based on speech. And so I, as an American, big on free speech, wouldn't kick him out. Where are you on this?
Well, there's like the legal brain and then the ethical brain and the what should be thing happening right now. So just a few points on the immigration point. I have seen claims that he became a permanent resident in 2023. That struck me as unlikely, given that he arrived in 2022. That's terribly fast. But it looks like, based on the notice to appear, which is the document ICE gives you when they're going to haul you in, and he will get a hearing, by the way. So he's not just going to get kicked out without any due process at all. But these are administrative courts, not federal courts, and we know that sometimes administrative courts, like it's not like normal court. But he will have a hearing of some kind. I'm going to rely on ICE's data that he became a green card holder in November of 24, and I understand that relying on government data is risky, but I'm going to do it. And so what that means is, because he did it through marriage, when you immigrate through marriage and you get your first green card, you are for 2 years a conditional permanent resident. And then 2 years later, you have to petition to remove the conditions on your residence. At each step, I promise you that USCIS is doing security check, background check, looking at your social media, doing all of that stuff to try to figure out if you're a threat to national security. So it may not ultimately matter in terms of whether we think there's a distinction between a conditional permanent resident and a lawful permanent resident, but there is a conditional status on his permanent residence as of right now.
Okay, well, let's drill into this further, because it's my understanding that if you're a green card holder or a legal permanent resident, that you are entitled to constitutional protections in the United States. You don't get to vote, but if you're a green card holder, you are entitled to due process. You are entitled to freedom of speech. So if he were being deported based on exercise of speech, even as a permanent residence, that to me would be problematic. I would not do that, right? Is the distinction you're making meaningful to what I am concerned about, or to existing protections that exist for immigrants? Is a conditional green card holder or conditional resident significantly different than a permanent resident in terms of the constitutional rights afforded to them?
There is no clear, these constitutional rights apply, but these ones over here don't. What ends up happening is that, there's a difference between a citizen and a permanent resident. Or why would we even classify them differently, right?
Sure.
Removing a citizen is really hard, if not impossible, as far as I know. And I'll mention quite quickly, I do practice immigration law, but I focus on self-petition, EB-1A, national interest waivers, employment-based stuff. So I don't practice in this area. I'm not an expert. But here's where I'd push back on you, is we're talking about this and everybody's kind of taking it for granted that this is speech. And at this point, I have not been able to find any concrete information about, what they're accusing him to have done, and not only that, but what part did he play? The only thing I know for sure is that he was the leader of Colombia Apartheid Divest. I think that's what it is. Yeah. And so he was the leader of that organization. Now, that organization is definitely aligned with Hamas. They do believe that Israel is committing genocide. They do call it out that, Israel needs to be contained, if not eliminated. Their mission is full of things like, here's one, and this is where I'm pushing back. So he was the leader here, and what I saw happen at Columbia was occupation of private property to the point where it was dangerous enough that the university told Jewish students not to show up on campus because it was too dangerous for them. So I'm wondering where the line is between free speech and, because, there are no protections for threats, intimidation, harassment. We have a lot of exceptions to the free speech rule. And so he was the one negotiating with the university. So I'm looking at that as he's leading a group that's taking over a university, that's putting students in jeopardy. He's the main negotiator with the university. They have a list of demands, and they will not settle for anything less than full divestment from the apartheid state of Israel, from every business that does anything with Israel. It's a very long list of complaints. And this statement struck me. It says, "We will not rest until Colombia divests from apartheid Israel. Palestinians are free and liberation is achieved for all oppressed people worldwide." So they're going to be busy for a minute. And I think you have to take into consideration the fact that there were Jews on campus who were being targeted and harassed, and that is not protected speech. Threats are not protected speech. And I'm a little uncomfortable with it would be one thing if he had gone out on a soapbox and said, "I hate Israel and Israel sucks and I want them to die," and but he was active. Like there's an organization involved. There's money in this somewhere. Somebody funded those protests. So and I mean, I've talked to some friends in New York. I know you have friends in New York too. But Paul Townsend, who is also a friend of the show, and I believe your personal criminal defense attorney.
Yeah.
But
that's why I swing my dick around when I'm in New York. I got Paul Townsend behind me.
I would too if I had a dick and had Paul Townsend as my lawyer. I'd do both those things, but I'm gonna not. But he was saying that it's very, very, very difficult to be Jewish in New York right now. And I have to. I feel like it crossed, but it's not clear that it was just speech. The other point I'll make is that there are provisions in the immigration law that are there for very good reason, that do grant discretion for the Department of State to deny entry to certain individuals. It is, codified in statute. They can do that. And I think the language they were using is what was it? I can't remember exactly what the language of the statute is, but it's something along the lines of like allying with an enemy of the United States or supporting them in any way, or
Okay, let's start with that one and let's work our way back, because I don't think that anybody will be able to challenge this constitutionally. Given that the Supreme Court has been pretty clear on executive power in the last session, with the executive immunity doctrine that was put forth by the court, I think they're very clear on there are certain things that the executive can do qua executive that you just can't call them out on. And so all the rhetoric that came around presidential immunity was like, look, you can't prosecute the president based on who they pardon. This is an absolute ability of the president. So I don't think that they will call out this particular statute or the execution thereof. I don't think that if Marco Rubio says, "I, as Secretary of State, officially deem this individual a threat to American foreign policy," I don't think the court would say, "We have the ability to review you on this." I think that it would say, "This is ultimately something that the voters have to respond to, and they can kick you out of the next election." But I don't think the court would challenge that. The specific wording is, "An alien shall not be excludable or subject to restrictions or conditions on entry into the United States because of the alien's past, current, or expected beliefs, statements, or associations, if such belief statements or associations would be lawful within the United States." So far, very pro-free speech. However, he goes on to say, "Unless the Secretary of State personally determines that the alien's admission would compromise a compelling United States foreign policy interest."
Okay.
So from a legal perspective, if this is what they go with, if they go with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952.
Well, it's now of 1990. It was replaced in 1990, but yeah. So
was this language
is the
maintained in
1990
it?
version. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Then in that case, I don't think the court will be able to say we know better than the Secretary of State, nor will I think they have standing. I think that they'll be able to do it. So I'm in agreement with you there that I think that they will carry the day there. I have many reasons for not liking this that we can get to later, but
Sure.
But insofar as will this work, I think it will work. Going to the next two. So the two reasons that Khalil should potentially be kicked out. You brought up that not all speech is protected. That incitement is not something covered by the First Amendment. Slander and libel are not covered by the First Amendment.
I want to push back on just very, very quickly on one thing here.
Sure.
And you note that all of this is in statute, and yet we're talking about executive discretion, which suggests to me that the statute grants the executive the discretion. You know who could fix that tomorrow?
Congress?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's the
I'm not.
thing about all of this, and it's a rant I won't go on right now, but let's keep in mind that like I have never seen so many people with so much power go on news shows and say, we're just powerless. There's nothing we can do. Trump is doing this and we can't stop it because he's mean and a racist. I mean, you're in the government. So that's just, I think it's a point worth remembering that, you know, whenever we're focused on what Trump himself is doing or the Trump administration is doing, remember that Congress has a role to play here, too. So if they actually wanted to protect this guy, they could propose legislation.
Sure. I have great disdain for both the president and Congress simultaneously.
Yeah, my expectations are incredibly low.
But my expectations are low. But so establishing that we've got the 1950, they've got the 1952 thing on their side. In terms of why they should be doing it, granted, I'm not the Secretary of State. I don't think this man is a actual threat to American foreign security, national security. Most of the dialogue about this is what you're talking about. Of look, if you're using speech to intimidate people or incite violence, that's no longer protected speech. If you're taking over a building, that's potentially illegal. I'm open to all of that, but to my knowledge, he has not been convicted on any of these counts. There has not been due process where if so the Columbia students took over, what is it, Barnard Hall or something like that. Okay. I would have just kicked out those students if I were Columbia, which I think they've now done. They've expelled several of them and revoked a couple of their degrees. Good on you. If it actually rose to the level of illegality, then there should have been cops involved. There should have been courts involved. That has not happened. I have not seen the due process so far of saying he's been associated with a group, he's been involved with a group versus he gave the orders for the thing to happen or he is legally culpable for it.
Okay, so this is a really important point. For purposes of immigration law, you don't have to have a conviction. You don't have to even have been charged. One point I'll make is that it doesn't appear in this case that they are relying on a violation of criminal law to justify the removal process. But if you have like told somebody that you did the elements of the crime, then you have to then you're inadmissibility. There are dozens of grounds of inadmissibility that would run contrary to what American citizens can do all the time. For example, if you have ever received military training, that's going to be questionable. That's going to be a problem. There's a long list of what I call the scary questions on one of the forms. It's like, and it's so easy to violate one of them. And I'm sure it's designed that way, but these are not criminal law statutes. These are immigration laws. And because he's not a citizen and he can be removed, there's no requirement that there's a finding of guilt in a U.S. court before he can be removed. And the question is not whether he committed a criminal act. The question is he advocating for things that are contrary to the U.S. foreign policy interests? I think that's not exactly the phrasing, but it's something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, Israel is in an active war right now. They are an ally. And, so he is, kind of by definition, advocating for stuff that is contrary to the policy of the United States government as of today. So, again, I'm not passing judgment on any of this stuff. I'm just, I think people get confused. They feel like it's not fair. They just take him and he didn't even get a trial. And what crime did he commit? And shouldn't he have due process? And now he's just in detention. I'm not saying any of this is good. I'm just saying it is, and that he will get an administrative hearing before a judge. He has an attorney. I'm sure she's one of the best in the country and is doing this pro bono. She's probably like a god on that side of the law. So, he's got advocates. He's got advocates. And the thing is, and stuff like this happens to people. It's not common for a permanent resident to be removed, but it does happen. And everybody, there's a sense that everything's being done is new.
Yeah, because there's lots here. I want to kind of hit these point by point. So, like to go back, you mentioned earlier that he's with the apartheid and divest group,
Columbia Apartheid Divest, I think it's called.
and that they are aligned with Hamas. I am very troubled by the use of the word aligned. This is the language that the Department of Homeland Security has used. Is John Mearsheimer aligned with Putin because he is not in favor of funding the war in Ukraine? Or to back up, was Ron Paul aligned with Saddam Hussein because he didn't think the invasion with Iraq was good? Like that to me is beyond the normal level of culpability we would attribute to somebody, to just sort of guilt by association of, I think whatever you're doing is congruent enough with an enemy that you could just be thrown in with the enemy. But if somebody had opposed the war in Iraq that had just graduated college back in 2004, I
Hmm.
wouldn't say they were aligned with Saddam Hussein and therefore they should be thrown out of the country because they are contravened to American foreign policy goals.
Okay. Well, let me read you a statement from the mission statement of the organization in question. As a coalition, our chief goal is to challenge the settler colonial violence that Israel perpetrates with the support of the United States and its allies. We have previously refused to focus on concerns pertaining to free speech, academic freedom, and student safety on campus as they distract from Israel's active commitment of genocide and ethnic cleansing. Um, I mean, it's really not comparable to saying, I just really don't think we should go to Iraq. It's a bad idea. He's not saying, I think we should, not support Israel or we should get out of the region. He's not even saying, I support a two-state solution. He is saying he wants Israel, not him, but he is the official leader of this organization. So, I mean, again, we have an organization involved. It's not just a guy who expressed an opinion.
I mean, is that the opinion of that group, if they're all American, would that be construed as within the confines of the First Amendment? Like, I would say, regardless of whether it's odious or not, that's protected speech.
Well, it would depend. There were videos. I saw a lot of videos from the Columbia protests, and I remember there was one that was particularly chilling where a group of students locked arms to form a human chain, and there were a few Jewish students in a little, corner, and they were saying really horrible, threatening things, and each time they said something, they'd take a step closer to these Jewish students.
Mhm.
That is not protected by the First Amendment. You
Right.
can be charged for that.
Mhm.
Threat. Yeah, I mean the harassment. Like I mean, and I know that this gets beyond Colombia. I sat in horror while Netanyahu visited our country, and a bunch of Hamas supporters decided to basically destroy as much of Union Station as possible. It's just I think that this is a movement that does kind of have a tendency to escalate into violence, and taking over a building is definitely not speech. So and again, that's one of the things that makes it hard to analyze the cases, because we don't know exactly what he participated in and didn't. So it's really hard to know where he fell within that spectrum. So I suppose it's possible that all he did was speak. But again, I'd like to note that when they went to speak to the administration, they were like, no, we are going to take over this campus unless you meet all of our demands, and we're not leaving until you meet all our demands. And one of them was like, one of the press conferences, he was saying how horrifying it was that the administration would not promise not to call the NYPD. Like it really felt like they were holding the university hostage a little bit. It
Right.
didn't feel like this was we oppose a war.
Right. A lot. I would love to clarify my position on all of this. First of all, I find a significant amount of college students irritating and self-righteous when it comes to anything involving protests. Immediately, my
Mhm.
hackles go up and go, this is probably going to irritate the shit out of me. So that's my
Mhm.
default position is you've discovered self-righteousness. Congratulations. Add in Israel-Palestine stuff. There's an incredible amount of latitude for outright anti-Semitism,
Mhm.
assholery of any stripe. So I'm not making the case that he's a good guy. I don't know. I don't have enough information on him. But it does seem to me that if he's a resident, and again, this is where I have to rely on you, and I've already, my mind's already mush here. But if he's a resident, it seems to me that he does fall within the umbrella of constitutional protections, and that if we're going to target him based on his speech, if that's what he's being targeted on, and all indications are it's either speech or association, then this is within protected speech. If he's going to get convicted of something illegal that goes beyond that, totally fine. But it seems to me what's happening is he's been selected based on his opinion and his association, and he's been used as a wedge, and they're finding a technicality in order to remove him so that they don't have to go through the due process or the First Amendment.
I see. This is where you and I are going to maybe disagree and find some tension. I think that you are far, far, far more cynical about the Trump administration than I am. I am over freaked out. I can't take it anymore. And at some point, I mean, oh, this poor guy. Nobody cares about my clients, right? Like this is something where once again, I feel like the left is using an immigrant as a prop, not the Trump administration. The Trump administration, everybody heard about this and suddenly there were big law firms involved. And, my feeling is, generally speaking, if a statute says a thing, isn't it kind of the obligation of the executive to enforce the thing? And if it's going to be discretionary, then you have to be prepared for that discretion to be exercised in a way you don't like. And I think we're conflating a couple things here. Again, the First Amendment would protect him from a criminal arrest, perhaps, but we're talking about immigration law and the Secretary of State's discretion to remove people who are, aligned with or whatever groups and organizations with, that are, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. So
Is he a member of it? Has he provided material aid to Hamas? Or is it that his speech is aligned with Hamas?
well, it wouldn't matter for immigration purposes. It doesn't matter at this point. It's his speech and actions. Like, I don't know. Not every action is speech. Not I'd like to. So here's a question. Here's what I'm kind of trying to figure out. If I came into your house and I said, I am not leaving, Andrew Heaton, until you give me $5,000. I'm staying. And you say, I'm not
Right.
giving you that. I'm like, sorry. In fact, also, I'm going to need a foot massage twice a day. Oh, and also I need this, and I need this, and this, and this. And then I come to you and I present my list of demands, and you say, well, I'm not going to be able to accommodate all of this. And imagine I knocked on the door and you let me in. And I said, no, I will. I'm going to run around your house playing the entire musical of Hamilton 24/7 until you give in to what I want you to do. Is that speech?
No, but
And so
I'm
at that point, that's why I'm asking about, like, if he's the one going and doing the negotiating. I guess it depends on whether you see what happened at Columbia as a legitimate protest or an occupation of a private university. A lot of the people on campus apparently were not students. So it's a really fuzzy thing.
I like your distinction between speech and action. I think that is a very relevant one. My main thing is if we're going to kick him out, there needs to be demonstrable illegal activity. Otherwise, it ends up being a speech issue.
Okay, so then unless you have a criminal conviction for something, you cannot be removed.
As you note, since this is going to be handled in an administrative court, I don't think it's going to have to rise to that level of criminality, but I want there to be some level of due process and an evidentiary threshold beyond just the Secretary of State has decided this person is not good. Like, I think that it should be more than vibes and feelings.
It is. There's a whole different agency responsible for the enforcement. So Secretary of State makes a designation, ICE makes the arrest. Under what conditions do you think it should be appropriate to remove someone, A, who's here on a temporary visa, B, on a temporary visa but has like an immigrant case in line, and 3 people who are conditional permanent residents, lawful permanent residents? We'll treat them the same for now. Just ignore the conditional part for now so that we could say, so like, what is the level of discretion that we should have the executive execute for those 3 categories? So we're talking about people who are strictly temporary, people who are here temporarily but pursuing permanent residence, and then people who already are. What are your thoughts?
I would have much heavier vetting on the incoming rather than the kicking out. So if we're going to start setting thresholds for acceptable levels of opinion, you're not allowed to have this opinion because this is contravened to the American values, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be the point before you get into the country. But once you're in the country and once you have residency and you're part of the constitutional penumbra, then you have incredible latitude, as does every American, in terms of having an odious opinion. So free speech for me would be far, far weightier once you're in the country than before you get in.
Oh, of course it would. It's much weightier once you're here because it actually might apply. Um,
Something that would be helpful to me, and I don't know the
mhm,
answer to this, maybe you do. How
okay.
often is this invoked by the Secretary of State? If this is a thing where the Secretary of State or one of the secretaries directly designated functionaries, this happens hundreds and hundreds of times a year. It's just that there's never any media attention. I would feel very different about it. As it is, as a layman who doesn't know this process, it seems this is the first time I've ever heard of it. So if it's this kind of dusty old thing that hasn't been used since 1992, then it seems like it's a technicality that's being weaponized. And I worry about the weaponization of technicalities in general, of laws that are ill-frequently used that can be dug up for some purpose in order for the executives to do whatever they want.
My response to that, as always, is talk to Congress. They could change the discretion. I should say something, just to be clear. I am, there are few hills that I would die on, and the First Amendment is one of them. I'm almost an absolutist about it. So nothing that I'm saying here suggests I support restrictions on speech. My point is that when we're vetting somebody who's coming to live here, it's appropriate to maybe consider things beyond criminal convictions alone, or and then you have to I'm such a lawyer, damn it, but you have to consider the practicalities, like, I mean, who's going to make these determinations? How many court cases, if we have a lot of due processes, how many new judges are we going to have to hire? How long is the suddenly it'll take you 10 years to get through the system? I think it's not that I'm saying the current system is the right one, but I have to just kind of categorically reject that this is nothing but expressing an odious opinion. I want to make one more point here, and that is about the conditional permanent resident status. It is built intentionally to allow the government to do a second check after 2 years. And so this guy had not cleared that yet because he wouldn't have been eligible to clear it yet. He only became a permanent resident through marriage in November of 2024. So he's going to be having to get those, try to get those conditions removed in 2026. So, you know, he's still going to have to file a form with questions like this about whether you ever, advocated for a terrorist organization or whatever the question may be. So, again, I know it may not seem like a meaningful distinction, but legally it is a distinction, and it does have a built-in second review process. Now, most of the time, what they're checking to make sure of is that the marriage was legit, because people get married for green cards and stuff. But they're also doing a national security thing, and I mean, and. I, it happens, and you can file waivers, and you can have, you can get out of a removal. It's not that he'll get no due process.
Okay. Um, before we finish up, I do want to hit like kind of my broader fear for all of this. You,
Yeah,
you noted that I am more cynical about the Trump administration than you. I think that's fair. I will note that I'm fairly cynical about all administrations.
yeah,
And the thing that I am increasingly worried about is a problem that Congress has created, which is that we have so many laws, so
yes.
many regulations that we're getting to the point where you can just kind of do whatever you want. I think that there's increasingly an amount of arbitrary law that occurs by virtue of there being so many laws that can be subjectively enacted. And this
Mhm.
is to me an example of that. Unless this is a regular thing, in which case I'm wrong. Or you saw the thing about the auto pen earlier today? Like that worries me. That strikes me as somebody that's trying to undermine the law through technicalities.
Oh my God, that doesn't strike me as, oh my God. Wow, we need to talk about that because I'm super interested in what your thoughts are. Because I am very, 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 I'm a huge fan of the Constitution. You may know that about me.
Yeah.
And I love Article 2. It's a great article. It's the most beautiful, luxurious article. It's the most beautiful article ever seen. And it vests the entire executive power in the person of the president, not a committee, not his staff, not a bunch of people we don't know, the president. One person. Federalist 69, 70. Look at them. It talks about this and why it's important to have one person be the president. So, if there's an auto pen somewhere and people can just apply his signature with his permission.
I'll just pause you so I can let people know what we're talking about really quick. The Trump wrote a statement on Truth Social earlier today. It says The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by autopen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. So what Trump is saying is that pardons that were done by Biden during the Biden administration, because they were done by use of an auto pen, are not legally binding. Therefore, he is retracting those pardons, or rather, they're annulled. The pardons never happened to begin with. That's what we're talking about, just for anybody that's unfamiliar with them. But you would stand by that, though, like any auto pen pardon or law that has been signed?
You see that, and I think that first of all, and a lot of people have this habit, like he uses those words and it triggers people. They're like, oh, here he goes being all Trumpy. And then he'll go on to say something and everybody goes, oh my God, he's going to be a dictator. Here's what's going to happen. He is going to say, sorry, those pardons are void. Then it's going to go to court. And we may finally, after some time, get some actual data on who the hell was running the country for 4 years. And it's the question before the court is not going to be about the technicality of the auto pen. It's going to be, are executive orders and pardons issued by a president who did not draft or sign or necessarily even know about, are those valid? Seems like a good question to ask, frankly. And Biden's pardons scared me more than Trump's theatrics, because that's all this is theatrics. He can't undo a pardon, and he knows that, but he wants to put the issue out there. So, but Biden pardoned his son and then his whole family, and then he pardoned sitting members of Congress. They got blanket pardons, and everybody's way more worried about the, oh, Trump said this thing on Truth Social, and I'm like, why did Adam Schiff need a blanket pardon? That's my question. And Liz Cheney, I'm curious about that. If you want to go back to the Iraq War, I mean, Liz Cheney is they were not very. They were pretty pro-war, so I don't know. I think that's far more odious than what saying,
Sure.
oh no, they're not valid because he wasn't even the one signing them is the point. I don't think it's the technicality that it was some device. I think it's that he wasn't actually the one taking the actions and executing the laws is the core question, I think.
Right. I'm not trying to defend the decision-making process behind the pardons that were given. I think probably corruption entered the equation with Hunter Biden specifically, right? So again, I make the ought and is distinction.
Yeah.
The ought, probably bad. I think a lot of pardons that are issued at the end of a presidential administration are kind of corrupt, where they just try to keep their buddies out of prison. It's fairly standard. But the is bit is that they're inviolable. They're indisputably within the purview of the executive. And so it worries me when an executive goes, I don't have to abide by them. If I'm understanding you correctly, and I think this is a very interesting point, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're bringing up, can the pardoning power be delegated in any way, shape, or form? As in, can I have somebody do it in my name if I give them the thumbs up, or do I have to physically sign it myself? That the invested in person is the actual root thing there?
I don't think the question is about the physical signature. I think it's about the fact that Joe Biden had no idea what was going on most of the time, and we all knew that. And now finally people are admitting it in huge numbers, and the stuff coming out so far has been pretty shocking, including one where he was talking to a reporter and had no memory of an executive order he had signed a few days prior to that. And they wouldn't release the Hur report, and they wouldn't charge him because he would have come off to a jury as incompetent. I think, and when I look at Trump now, I've kind of chilled about it. I've decided to let go of the past grudges. He's going to be a blowhard. He's going to sound like an idiot. I'm dealing with all of that. But I read Scott Adams has a really great book called Win Bigly. And
it is a really good book. I agree.
It is a good book. And I see Trump completely differently now. So, I think the birthright citizenship, for example, I think the lawyers he has must be smart enough to know that that's very unlikely to survive. However, it shoves that question before the public. And I think a lot of times that's what he does, is he takes an act that he knows isn't really going to go anywhere, but what he's doing something else with it sometimes, if that makes any sense. I don't know. I'm watching and waiting. I'm trying to judge this presidency without consideration of the last one, and trying to evaluate it on its merits. It's not easy. The history is hard, but I will say it's been greatly facilitated by how horrible the Democrats are. And I have a lot of hope for Doge. And I'm eternally frustrated by all the efforts to stop them from doing stuff. So I don't know. I'm just seeing, I feel like we need a little creative destruction, and it's no painless way out of it. But I mean, we're facing Leviathan. Social security numbers are not unique. I mean, like we're finding out stuff about our government that seems way more important to me than, whether Mahmoud Khalil is being removed because he has odious opinions or whatever. I think right now I'm looking at big picture. I'm looking at a big old forest and trying to really see it. And I feel like I'm surrounded by people who are running around going, "Oh my God, I found a bush. This is not a tree. This is a bush. Therefore, this is not a forest." And, it's just, I don't know. I'm much happier.
Good.
So there's that. I just don't worry anymore. I'm kind of like, interesting.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not, but I feel like we'd have to go a lot longer if we were going to dive into Doge and other things like that. So I'll let you have the last word on that. But Anna, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I will be back in Austin here pretty quick, and I look forward to seeing you there. And I hope that your air conditioning unit is fixed lickety-split. Anna, always a pleasure. Where can people find you? And
I am at Kendall Immigration, Kendall Immigration Law. That's www.kendallimmigration.com. You can schedule a consultation there. You can read a little bit about stuff. And I'm, cap season is not quite yet closed. So any last minute cap registrations who want to try to jump in there, give me a call. And I'm also on the Twitter or the X or whatever we're supposed to call it. And it's just my name, so you can find me there easy.
And I'll note that Anna is a regular tweeter and an interesting tweeter. So for people that are on X, she is worth a follow.
I mean, yeah. Dozens of people are interested in things I say. It's great.
All right. Well, I'm one of them. So thank you, Anna.
Woo! Yeah. Winning. All right. Great to see you.
That's the show. Thank you, Anna Gorisch, for coming on to discuss Mahmoud Khalil. Thank you, Paul Townsend, for remaining my personal attorney when I am in New York. And in perpetuity, Paul, agreeing to come bail me out of the clink if I need it. Paul, I want you to know, I went to Purim last week, and I got pretty drunk. And as we both know, it is a mitzvah, Paul, to get drunk at Purim. So what I'm saying, Paul, is I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm out drinking with the Jews at Purim. So just want everybody to know that, but in particular, my attorney. All right, just throwing that out there. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.